Hello and good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to welcome you all to the launch of the EAVE 2025 impACT think tank report. We are very happy to present it in partnership with the Marché du Film as part of the impACT program, with our partners from When East Meets West and our supporting partners from Canada Media Fund, IFTA, and also Telefilm Canada. We launched the EAVE impACT think tanks in 2019. And it was always the idea to bring together global producers to reimagine a more just, more equitable global screen industry and to have more sustainable models for cooperation. In 25, co-productions are no longer just cultural bridges between countries, but they have become a crucial survival strategy as well in a situation where public funding is shrinking, where there's more and more financial pressure on the global screen industry, and also where there's less commissioning. This year's think tank builds upon last year's think tank, actually, but it goes a step further. The idea was really to give actionable steps, concrete actions for producers, how they can have a more just, sustainable, and equitable co-productions and relationships with their producing partners. The participants of the think tank that we convened in Trieste in January, they co-created a set of guiding principles and values for international co-productions that some of the participants will present today. It's very much about embedding inclusion from the start on, sharing access, sharing power, also prioritizing communities, and most of all, also considering value beyond just money. And the resulting guide is both something that a practical resource, but also most of all, a call for action for a more just screen industry. A big thanks goes to all our partners that I've mentioned in the beginning, also to the Film Fund Luxembourg and Creative Europe. And the biggest thanks of all to Tamara David, who is not only the one who guides and facilitates the think tank, she's also the one who is the author of the report, and she will moderate today's panel and introduce our panelists to you. You will find here on this slide 2 QR codes. It's the report that we are launching today. It's available in English and French, and from Monday on it will also be on the EAVE website under the impACT session. So I hand over to Tamara. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here with us so early on your Saturday morning. Either this means some of you have had a lot of coffee, or maybe some of you are like me and went to bed really early last night. Thank you, Tina, as well, for the wonderful introduction. I think the other thing I wanted to say about the framing before we get into the questions with our panelists here is that when we talk about co-production, this could be inter-country co-production. This could also be domestic co-production. We're talking about co-productions perhaps between white producers and those from the global majority. We're talking about low-capacity countries and high-capacity countries. And we may also be talking about a co-production maybe in the UK, in Canada, here in France, between a newcomer and a more established producer, between an indigenous or black producer and a more established company. All of those are opportunities for success and strong partnerships, but also sometimes collaborations that can have risks or perhaps things that leave one co-producer feeling a little bit less supported in that relationship. So that's really the thinking in terms of the types of collaborations that we were thinking about in doing this report. I really want to start off with looking at the beginning of how co-productions come together. Sometimes when we hear about complaints and issues, it's after the thing is done. We're here in Cannes, the film is screening, and you're sitting in a cafe, and the producer is like, oh my God, it was this nightmare, and this and this and this happened. And our report goes through sections from development to finance and contracting to production, post, and distribution and release. But let's start with the development section because we have some very specific recommendations about what to do in the beginning as collaborators, as producers, thinking about coming together to really set yourself up for a more equitable and inclusive collaboration. So Miriam, I wanted to get you to sort of lean into what things can we do at that stage to try to prevent future issues?
Thank you, Tamara. First, I want to say it was a real pleasure to participate in this think tank because it's things like discussing, thinking about equitable co-production is something I've been thinking about for a long time as I've been working as a producer based in Lebanon. And it was great to be with a group of people who had like similar experiences and had, find ways to come through this and share concrete plans and practical tips, because of course sometimes there are things that are beyond of our control, but there are things we can actually implement, and the fact we all came together and brought this report to life, I think, will be a great guideline for a lot of producers, especially newcomers to co-production. That being said, I've always considered co-production a sort of marriage. You find a co-producer, you are in an adrenaline rush, you are excited about the project, they tell you they're going to bring money, they're going to bring value, you are so excited, you want to make your film, so sometimes you rush into signing a deal without really discussing everything, and like in a marriage, they say you have to discuss, finances, religious values, upbringing of the children, boundaries with the family, all of this. So it's kind of the same thing with a co-producer. At the stage of development, you really should take the time to discuss the core values of the project, the vision for it, because sometimes people get excited over a project, but they have different ideas of it. So these discussions should take place, of course, I think, with the director, because the director should be part of this conversation, and the director is equally involved in the co-production because it affects his creative process. When you bring in, creative collaborators from another country, when you ask him to go do post-production somewhere else, to work, let's say, with a sound designer who doesn't speak his native language. So all of this should be discussed early on, and I would say before signing anything, like just make sure you have the same idea of the project. You discuss really in depth, like what will the co-production look like in terms of who would we bring from the co-producing country, which creative items, what would be the spending obligations, define also what's the success, like what's the ideal objective for the film, because sometimes a co-producer would be in it because, let's say, they want to get into EAVE festivals, and sometimes the originating producer wants a local success, so it wouldn't be the same vision. So that's really important to align on that and bring it in it as many details as possible. Like, don't feel like, oh, this we can discuss later, because sometimes red flags arise very early. And in the end, like, it would be good to do a sort of breakdown or a sort of memo that could be attached to the memo deal signed between the producers, just to keep track of this is what we agreed on. We would bring the cinematographer, the editor from your country. We would have the shooting done this way. Also discuss, like, if there are things related really to the community where the film is taking place, what are the cultural differences, things that need to be respected, safety issues, for example, if there are any safety issues related to the director, the filmmaker, or the team, to discuss them ahead of time, all of that.
Yeah, so I think it's really about spending time to interrogate these things and document them. I think, before we've talked about having those conversations, but I think actually documenting it, putting it in your contract, makes it maybe a little bit more tangible. And then it's something that everyone knows what they agreed to. Thank you, Miriam. Emile, I want to turn to you. Last year's report talked a little bit about positionality of the storytelling team, but this year we went a little bit further to talk really about what does it mean to ethically and inclusively engage with a community as a co-producer when it's not a community that you're from? And the report has really specific guidelines about that, and I'd like you to sort of explain perhaps what they are and why.
Thanks, Tamara, and really happy to be here again, and also to have been part of this think tank now for 2 years. I think I echo what Miriam said about this experience of being in a room with a lot of people that have shared experiences of these collaborations and how they can be tricky and difficult and problematic, but also how they can be super rewarding if they're done well. So those experiences, I think, are really important to share. I'm from Greenland, I'm based in Copenhagen, so I work a lot between the colonial relationship between an indigenous population that I'm part of in Greenland and then the former colonizing power with all the power structures that remain from many, many years of colonization, and also from many, many years of colonizations of stories, because all the films that were made in Greenland up until like 25 years ago, they were all made by outsiders, mostly people from Denmark. The whole tradition of filmmaking where I'm from is based on really anthropological documentaries that people would come in and make without engaging with the local community at all, without any Greenlanders or Greenlandic Inuit being part of the filmmaking or the storytelling. So it was just like up for grabs for anyone who came. And even with larger fiction films, if you look through the Danish film history, you can always see that really big, ambitious projects would be shot in Greenland because of the lore and because of the locations and the beautiful sceneries. And if you look at major Danish film milestones from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you can even see that the Greenlandic actors that are actually in the film, in the credit lists, are only credited by their first name. So obviously there's been like a power dynamic where we weren't taken seriously, where there were no collaboration on any equal terms. And so coming back from that long history of 100 years of people telling our stories, to start to demand to be part of telling our own stories, and also to have an equal say in the projects that come in from the outside, is a super tricky conversation to have, and something that I think we just in the last 13 years since the Greenlandic Filmmakers Association was established, where we've really been, focused on the value of us telling our own stories and demanding to have an equal say when outside producers come in to make films. And we see a very different situation when we work with Danish production companies that kind of grew up in a situation where Greenland was really up for grabs. And then when we have other production companies from other countries coming in with a completely different form of curiosity and respect. So we try to be very wary of that, and also to have conversations from the very beginning about how this collaboration can work and what we demand in order to provide the access that we can actually give. And there we are super inspired by other indigenous filmmaking communities around the world, and the work that they've done for many more years than us in securing equitable approaches to collaborations. For instance, Screen Australia did a report for a pathways report on how to work ethically with indigenous filmmakers or stories in Australia. Similar things have been done in Canada by the Indigenous Screen Office and Imaginative. And even in SAPMI, the International Sami Film Institute, has their own pathways and protocol guide that we are also inspired by, because there's so many similarities. And so to have a document where you can actually say to people, this is how we work, and this is what you should be mindful of, and this is how we can build the co-production or the collaboration on equal terms. And also to actually be aware of the power that we hold now, because there is a common understanding now globally that you cannot just come in and steal other people's stories. And if we unite in our communities, you can't just go on to the next producer and do what you thought you could many years ago.
Can you shed some light on the report points to the idea of visiting instead of location scouting? If you have maybe a French crew coming to Greenland, how would a visiting trip look different from a traditional location scout or recce? And why would you do that?
Well, it depends on the production, but for some of the most recent ones we've just finished a huge shoot on a French feature film, and that was really a long process over a year of continuous visits that were for scouting and recce purposes also, but there was also basically cultural training trips and meeting crews, meeting us, talking about the story, meeting my mom. My mom is such an important part of this. So I always bring her in, and she teaches some Greenlandic language, she talks about the culture. And then we always tell them what films to watch. So to have some, to give them some kind of a foundation to understand this culture that they're coming into. And what happened on this very recent shoot was also that in the crew, we just happened to have a lot of fantastic Greenlandic singers. So every night was karaoke night. And then even the French crew started singing Greenlandic songs.
Yeah, and I think certainly one of the things that was discussed among a lot of the producers in Trieste was sometimes, you know, maybe you're a European and you're co-producing with someone in Latin America, Asia, Africa, and you think, oh, it's better for me to just send the money and not show up. But the decision was it's better if you just spend that $2,000 or $3,000 and go out in development and actually understand the realities of producing in that country and meet and know the people that you're going to be working with. Jennifer, I want to turn to you. So Miriam talked a bit earlier about the idea of having some sort of documentation about the vision for the film, but I want to turn to the idea of contracting and some of the recommendations we have there, which is quite a lengthy section, so not all of them, but a few of them, please, in terms of how to be a bit kinder to each other.
Yeah, I try to summarize. I come from a high-capacity country. I come from France, so and I've been fighting for years to establish what should be normal relationship, because we tend to forget, and sometimes it's purposely to forget that ethics and professional conduct are really part of the negotiation and of the business relationship. It's not optional. I mean, it's create the condition for you know, effective collaboration, and also now as a consultant and legal advisor, I think it's important to remind that justice, and you use the word, justice comes from the Greek and Roman mythology, Justitia, and Justitia was a goddess, and she represented order, fairness, harmony, and she was there also to predict the future. And I think this is something that we should remind us when we set up a legal co-production agreement, and in order to put clarity, to put balance, and to put anticipation. And it's not against anyone, it's just to create a collaborative environment. Negotiation is not a battlefield, otherwise you're just a crook if you think it is. Negotiation is, the purpose is to reach a mutual understanding and a mutual agreement. And by the way, legally, the negotiation is called the meeting of the minds. So I mean, it tells a lot. And if you don't meet the minds, how do you want to work together? And as Miriam said, yeah, it's like a marriage. So if you don't agree to sit down and to discuss essential elements on your contract and put it in your contract. Also, the contract is very flexible. I mean, you can put everything you want, and it's very important for the future in case of misunderstanding. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, because even if you with your husband who's from maybe the same or wife the same country, there is a lot of misunderstanding. So can you imagine there's not going to be misunderstanding when you work with another culture, another country, another time zone? So first in the contract, and we have been drafting some major inputs in the report, but I think it's very important first to start with an introduction of the contract, which is called recitals, by the way, introduction or something that you put before the contract, and that would, you know, give the genesis of the contract, the history of the project, also the history of the country, of the local communities. Maybe you can add also a memorandum to it with the main cultural element of the country you are working with, so that everyone knows what has been the story of the development of the project. Because sometimes a producer, and it happens a lot with low capacity country, they've been working for 7 years in the country, and when the financial co-producer arrive, he thinks it's the first day of the film. And so if you don't include this in the contract, and if any dispute arrives, then there is nothing to say, well, I've been working for 7 years in the contract. So it should be definitely included in the contract, and I always encourage producer and co-producer to put it down, I mean, to write it down. Also, the decision-making, as you said, is crucial. I mean, including a clause of decision-making and of making sure that the originating producer will always have his final word, creatively speaking, on the development, but on the production, and we'll talk about the post-production. But making sure that there is also a process of decision making. Same thing with ownership, with salaries, with producer fees, with overheads. You will find a lot of details in the reports, but how you split them, how you decide to have equity in splitting them, and not considering only, because this is the main issue, and I know it's very difficult because depending on the legal framework you are on, the institution are sometimes forcing you to consider only financial contribution, but there is a lot of non-financial contribution, and it should be taken in consideration. And again, if it's not written down, if it's not justified, how could you justify it to a fund or to a national institution? So this is something that needs to be addressed, and there is a lot of monetary contribution, but access to the country, knowledge, as you said, your mom is a contribution, is an incredible contribution. She spent time and she trained people, so it's very important, and also to include this in the contract and to make sure that the contract reflects the reality, even though it doesn't seem to be a legal wording. I think you can add it in the contract and amend the contract, and it has to be that long, but at least be in there.
Exactly. So I think part of the message maybe you're hearing across the many people here is to sort of slow down and take the time at the beginning. Don't be distracted by maybe the allure of a lot of money or a diamond ring, and really talk with each other about what you're going to do, and then document that in the contract. Daniela, the other half of the contract is not just about what we all put in, but perhaps what we may potentially get out. And can you talk a bit about some of the ideas in the report around revenue and profit sharing?
Yes, so as Jennifer was saying, hello everybody, happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So what we were thinking also is a lot of what is actually, how can we value all this contribution that is non-financial from low-capacity countries. So as Jennifer was saying, if someone is working since 7 years on a project, developing, having all of this cultural aspect and expertise in the project, how can we value this? And it's interesting to see that in our industry, we do have experts that can evaluate, for example, a catalog of a company, and there's actually a value on it. So how can we actually value this for all the development and all the work that was done before doing the legal aspects and actually starting a co-production? And obviously, this is a work that needs to be done with collaborations from the institutions in the structural the financial plan. How can this be reflected as, is it in kind or just a cultural input and value? And also, yeah, there would be.
Yeah, and I think there was also a recommendation about sort of, in terms of the revenue split, having a base amount for the originating producer. Why is that important, or why do they sometimes get cut out?
So we know that low-capacity countries have sometimes a little bit more of difficulty in financing, so how can also this value be different in the rights and also in the financial and also in the recoupment? So maybe if there would be there would be more balance, and actually the institutions or maybe the treaties could actually they can permit us to change this. Coming from a high capacity country, I would think it would be completely normal for a low capacity countries to have a higher percentage, for example, on the recoupment, and even in the rights also. So it's always right now. It always balance on the three spots, but I think all of this needs to be reevaluated.
And I think one of the things we talked about a bit during the think tank was the idea that sometimes we're very protectionist, or we just think about ourselves and like how much money are we maybe going to get. But I think when we start to think about our co-producers as really truly partners and collaborators, you want everyone to benefit, because when everyone starts to benefit, it sort of, you know, builds the collective, and those companies grow, your company grows as well. Miriam, I want to come back to you, because the sort of big other section under contract and financing was about cost differences between countries and how to deal with differences in currency, differences in costs, perhaps, you know, also in your experience between Lebanon and then dealing with the euro, there's huge differences there. Can you lead us through sort of some of the ideas we had in this section about how to address these issues?
Yes, it's all about, it all goes under the same, you know, big title, which is like bringing equity to the co-production that is not only related to how much money each co-producer brings, because sometimes you could, like, let's say, Norwegian or Swedish co-producer would bring you money for post-production, but post-production costs 3 times or 4 times more than what it would cost in your country. And okay, it's a big amount of money and you need it because otherwise you cannot finish your film, but it is, for example, 40% of your budget, because if you had done it in Lebanon, it would have been 5% of the budget. So does it mean that the co-producer who brought you the money should have 40% of the shares? Not at all, because it inflated your budget, but you had no other choice, and it's all about like balancing this unbalance, you know, inequity, and finding ways. So what was discussed during the think tank and what is reflected in the report is to have like a budget that is defined over one country, either the high capacity country. So all the numbers are the ones, like for the salaries, for the overheads, for everything, equipment, etc., are put on the currency of the high capacity country, or on the contrary, put everything evaluated upon the currency of the low capacity country, and establish the percentage of what each producer is bringing upon that, and not just upon how much money I'm bringing, but how much this means in comparison to the overall budget. And this comes, of course, in addition to what Emile and everyone, Jennifer, Daniela has said, like bringing value, like defining the value of development. If a producer has spent 7 years of unpaid development, this should be also reflected in the budget. Of course, there should be numbers that are reasonable and not like put in disproportionate numbers just to increase the value, but really define what would have been a minimum amount that it makes sense to be put in. Also, considerations should be about savings. Sometimes co-producer, a producer from a low capacity country would bring that are never really valued also, because most of the time we use our network, we use our resources to ask for services and bring the costs down, and that makes the budget go down, which allows us to make the film, but then we pay the price because the high-capacity country have syndicates, unions, minimum wages, etc., and they cannot pay less, and then we are disbalanced in the co-production because of that. We should be rewarded and not punished for making efforts and using our resources. So the whole rethinking of the budget comes from that idea.
Perfect. So maybe some homework for people to read that section of the report. I want to move forward to talk about production. Emile, I'm going to come back to you. There's a number of recommendations in terms of, you know, now that you've made everything perfect with your development conversations and your contract and you have all the money, what are some of the practical tips to sort of avoid creating new imbalances when everyone's in the location and on set and you have crews coming from perhaps a number of different places?
Well, I think, again, it all circles around some of the same issues and some of the same ideals that we talk about now. Also, this Miriam's not very romantic sounding marriage, but still like an important relationship.
Marriage of reason.
Yeah. But I think just finding the right partners for any project is so important, and just to have that gut feeling and the intuition that tells you that this is going to be okay, and I like this person or I like these people, and I want to try this partnership and see where it brings me, but also not to be afraid of just saying no sometimes when it doesn't feel right. And so a lot of these things that we talk about now, and these things that we're trying to change, I mean, they also come from colonist or colonial systems. I just heard last night that the co-production treaty between Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark is finally now being renewed, and that treaty is from 1997, and that is the rules that we have worked under anytime we've produced between Greenland, because that's part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and then our friends, our family, our fellow Inuit on the Canadian side of our lands. And so what has changed since 1997 in the international film industry? Everything. So these rules are just like basically not constructive in any way any longer, and that's why we need to actually also say what are the rules, and then what can we put into contracts in the relationships that we are actually building with other people, with other producers, and say that there are some things where we need to play by the rules if we need to have the funding, need to work through the treaties, but also that we can make certain arrangement in the contracts that make for a better work relationship. And that goes into, when that's established, that goes into the relationship in production as well. Setting up the conditions for our crews so that they are similar, and not only that they're similar, but also that they're equitable, because in Greenland, for instance, just to take an example from some of the work that we've done, we, as part of the Danish kingdom, we have high living standards, we have high minimum wages, so cost levels are almost the same as in most of Western Europe, but we don't have any like framework for film production. We don't have a film union or any like rules for pay within the film industry. So sometimes when we work with Danish producers, they say, why not just use the Danish union wages? So in that way, making sure that we're all paid equally. And that sounds great, but what it doesn't say is that these wages are based on experience. And so after we say, yeah, that's a great idea, the next thing we hear is, yeah, so how many feature films did your DOP make? Okay, none, because, I mean, we don't have any funding to make feature films. So immediately he's put on the very low level assistant wage. And so just to be mindful of these kinds of booby traps, and to say that this experience that my DOP or my art department or anyone in my crew come with has a different value for this particular production, and that is how we assess the wage, not based on IMDb credits or something like that. So those conversations are just so incredibly important to have going into production, because once you're on set and people realize that they work on very unequitable terms, that's when problems start to happen.
You also had an addition that's in the report about language on set. Can you talk to how you've implemented that in the past?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, and we've talked about that in many colonial relationships. Like, for instance, when we work with Danish crews, all of our local crew, they also speak Danish. But maybe it's not the best practice on set to speak the colonizing language and to have all the power dynamics that's also in a language where one part of the crew also speaks it better. So then we've just said, okay, for this film, the on-set language is English. and then trying to level it like that. And it's the same that I've learned working with Sami producers. For instance, the Sami population in Norway, they all speak Norwegian, and they have a lot of the same language discrimination when they work on set with Norwegian crews. So also to try to do that, unfortunately we cannot ask our Danish partners to speak Greenlandic because they can't. Similarly, the Samis can't ask their Norwegian crews to speak Sami, so let's try to find something else that's more balanced.
Yeah, so I think if you go through that section, really the theme is balance. I was in Ethiopia last week doing pre-production work for a film, and I told the line producer, because I know what's in this report, he's going to see it now next week, everyone's eating the same meals, everyone's staying in the same hotel, and he was horrified. He's like, no, we can't eat with the Dutch. And I'm like, no, you're all going to eat together because you're one team. And it was really something that I think he still hasn't wrapped his mind around, but we'll get there.
It's that simple, isn't it?
Yeah. Jennifer, I want to come to you and talk a bit about post-production because, sometimes by the time we get there, it's sort of the marathon to deliver, and we forget to still be patient and kind to each other. So what are some of the tips for that part of the process?
Yeah, I think that part of the process is very often totally neglected. It's kind of the technical stuff and sometimes the end of the marriage, because after we have the feeling that the post-production is only technical, and also when we have financing, we don't look at obligations. Most of producers just say, well, we'll see that in post-production. But yeah, when you have to send the director in a foreign country for a long period of time, for more than 3 months, that he doesn't speak the local language, there are things to address because it can be really a nightmare in terms of in terms of dignity, in terms of respect, in terms of work, and also in terms of content, because you need to have well, at least you need to have an assistant of the director or someone who speaks his language. I mean, like everyone needs to work properly and in good condition, and sometimes it's not addressed and it's not anticipated. So, of course, in the report, we've been talking about, integrating a cultural coordinator or a cultural manager or a post-production cultural manager, but who can be the same person in the development, in production, and also in post-production, and who would be responsible of coordinating all the countries that who are co-producing, because sometimes it's co-produced between several countries, and then it's very heavy. It's very heavy to know what's going on, and in terms of storytelling also, having someone who review what is done, who review if all the things are correct and are meeting the requirements also of the local communities. I can give you an example, but I remember on a film set in a very remote island, the European co-producers changed the name of the local community because they think it was more understandable for a Western audience, but it was completely false, and it was really something that would hurt the local community. So if you don't have anyone who says that's not true, and okay, for you maybe it's more understandable, but it's not true, and it could be very hurtful for people there. So I mean, having someone and having also the producers being informed regularly of all the stages of the post-production is crucial, ensuring, I mean, the narrative and the visual remaining respectful and accurate, and also prioritize the managements that also include, I mean, the post-production coordinator, because sometimes, there are misunderstandings about technical stuff, so having someone who speaks, make sure that people speak the same language and translate and aggregate all the information of post-production is very important. And make sure also that everyone work with efficiency, with the communication running smoothly. And finally, also something that matters, and that's a huge gap in negotiation, or something that end the marriage, the credits. I mean, the credits is the same thing. The originating producer should validate all the credits. The names also of the people and the local communities. There's someone who makes sure that it's the accurate name, and there are no mistakes. Sometimes if they want to have a translation, like their names in their language and the names translated in English, and it doesn't take that much time to do it, you know. And also the credit should reflect and should be fair to the exact amount of work that people have done. And both in one country and the other country. I see constantly as a consultant, you know, issues about credits, like there's no place, oh, we haven't been discussing it in the development, it's not in the contract. Does that need to be in the contract if someone has work? You know, does that need to be in the contract that your mom came and train everyone? I mean, you have to credit her. It's not a matter of negotiation, it's about a matter of being fair.
Exactly. Daniela, I want to dig a little bit more into post-production because the report talks a little bit about editors and sound designers, composers, because I think sometimes we think about casting maybe like the actors or the protagonists and making sure that they're hopefully from the communities that are being represented. But what should we also be thinking about in terms of post and who we're hiring and how they really relate to the positionality of the story?
So yes, in post-production, obviously, the editor is key as how he will interpret and work on authenticity of the story. So we were talking about obviously having authenticity experts, take the time also to see what actually is going to be edited and shown. The public is going to see that last version of what is after all this marriage. So what is really, how can you maintain editorial making decision with the low capacity or the originating producer and low capacity producer, and also just to make sure that the narrative is not changed, because we have seen many times that this can change actually at the edit and at the post-production. And also, how can we really maintain these stories, organize screenings with the communities, and also at the rough cut, at the final cut also, and make sure also that maybe if there's broadcasters or any other partners in this project that they don't change also this narrative that is really what was agreed on since the beginning, and which respects, right, the authenticity of this narrative. And I would say also same thing with sound design and music. Music is such an important element also of authenticity, and how can music composers and music can really, it could really add up something to this narrative. Personally, I have the experience on the last feature that I produced in 2023, Carnaval, from Henri Pardo, which is from a Canadian director from Haiti. So we were working with a composer that is from Venezuela and Trinidad. He had this sensitivity of Caribbean music and knew a little bit more about the cultural aspects, but for us it wasn't enough. So we really looked for an Asian composer, a musician. He's a Ougan, so he's a voodoo priest that knows a lot about the traditional sounds and music of Haiti, and he was integrated, so he was a co-composer. So this is a kind of collaboration that you could look for on music.
Thank you. So now I'm going to turn to the last section, which is release and distribution. So you've now done everything perfectly. Miriam, I know there was a lot of conversation in the think tank about sometimes issues of who gets to attend the festival, who has their travel paid for, and even sometimes earlier, you know, who gets to go to the pitch market. Maybe the project is presented here somewhere in Cannes, and it's only the European or North American producer who can show up, and not the originating producer. Can you talk a bit about, I guess, those issues and some of the things we're suggesting should be done differently?
Yes, it goes back to the idea of discussing things in development and not forgetting the distribution, because I'm glad this marriage metaphor picked up, but like the premiere of the film is like the graduation of the child, you know, and both parents should be able to attend. And considering like one of them is poor and the other one is rich, and so one goes in great conditions and the other one has to be indebted, you know, and pay 3 months worth of salary to be able to go to the graduation. So this is a little bit the comparison. But it's exactly that. So it's something that needs to be discussed from early on, like the travels, because also when you come from a low capacity country, and because most of pitch markets, important ones like EAVE festivals, are in Europe, if your co-producer is from Europe, his flight is cheaper. Also, most of the time, they have access to national funding from their local institutions, whereas the low-capacity country comes from a farther place. Most of the time, the company is barely making money. Most of the time, low-capacity producers are, you know, either doing other jobs to sustain a living, and they produce out of passion, and they don't make money. So their company cannot really sustain those costs. There are no local institutes or film institutes to sustain that. So the discussion was about, you know, including the cost of travel of the originating producer in the budget from early on. And this, of course, after discussions, because we need to keep being mindful about the budget and we don't want to inflate it for no reason. So just discuss, like, travel costs. Do you have an institution who could help cover them in case, you know, the film gets picked up to an EAVE festival? Who could help? Are there sponsors who could be helping, etc.? And if there is something similar, then you don't put them in the budget. But if there's no way for the producer to attend except paying his own ticket and his own travels, then they should be included. And it doesn't mean, for the sake of equity, like Emile is saying, that also the co-producers' expenses should be included, because most of the time they would be covered by another institution that comes and support the distribution. So this is really important. Also, it's important to discuss early on, like, who of the key crew members or mainly cast would attend, and how to bring them, and who would pay for that early on, because always we need to bring them, and it's something that we can discuss, of course, with sales agents, try to include it in their expenses, but always have a backup plan in case it doesn't get included. Discuss also pitch markets, who would go, and include that in the development budget, and always prioritize the producer, or the originating producer. I'm not saying it should be the producer from the low-capacity country. Sometimes maybe a producer from the high-capacity country is the one who's really involved in the creative process, who's really in line with the director's vision. So it should be discussed, like, who is the best producer to go pitch that project, to go bring in partners, to do the best discussion, the negotiations, and prioritize that. Also, we discussed about not just limiting attendance to the premiere, but also define some key screenings. For example, the screening in the country of origin of the film, and having also the co-producer come and attend it if possible. Like the main regional, for example, in the Arab world, we have the Arab festivals, and it's a really key premiere. So it's important also that there is cast, that we propose also to other crew members to come. It could be that they come for out of their own pocket, for example, but we could help them by giving them accreditations or getting them, you know, the corporate rate of the festival, etc. But try to involve the crew members of the low-capacity country, because most of the time, like, they do the work, they not get paid so well, and so it's good to involve them in the film's success when it happens, and also to expose them to you know, the industry, because this is also where they could get jobs. Like, for example, the DP of Costa Brava, Lebanon, Joe Saadeh, it's really because he was a key member in defining the vision of Costa Brava, etc. And Munia was working really closely with him, and he came to us to some pitching platforms, and he was with us in the festivals, and this is how he landed another film, Joyland, that really had, like, it was in Certains Regards, and it's a film that brought him like international success. And if he had stayed in Lebanon and no one had met him, I don't think it would have been the case, because Joyland was, I think, shot before Costa Brava. So, you know, they met him through us, but he managed to make another film before. So that's really, really important in terms of thinking ahead about this thing that usually we think of at the latest and we never estimate, but it's a big cost. And also we talked about discussing with festivals to also include producers when they do their invitation. Most of the time, festivals consider that the producers are rich and they can come at their own cost and they get nothing. And it's really unfair when you're from, you know, really struggling to make a living or really struggling to make your film, and then you don't even get, like, sometimes some festival they invite the director to like a dinner, you know, of filmmakers or a lunch, and the producer doesn't even get invited. It's like, come on, what does it cost? What does it cost the festival to have an extra meal? So these are really important discussions to have from early on.
Perfect. And I think the other thing in the distribution section was the idea that where the film is set, where it was shot, to make sure that you're not just distributing this in fancy cinemas in high-capacity countries, but that the film goes back to those communities. We only have about 10 minutes, so we want to stop talking, or at least me, and see if there's questions in the audience. Marco.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was very enlightening. Just a quick question about as funds shrink up in the global north, more European filmmakers are looking to go to the global south. Does your report discuss the same kind of moral ethics when it comes to, because it's kind of unbalanced right now on everything that's required by the European co-production deals regarding working with European funds that are not the same for working with Southern funds. And so when European filmmakers start going to the South, primarily the MENA region, South Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, for private equity, have you considered how the things that you've talked about would affect European filmmakers going down south?
I mean, I think, and I'll let some of the panelists speak to this, I think some of the funders this year, part of their rationale in working on this report with us was realizing that there's less money in many high-capacity countries and it's more competitive. And because of that, we have to learn to collaborate with more people. And we need to do that and not be assholes. And we need to find better ways of doing that. So I think even though this year's report is very focused on producers, I think that funding bodies have to also look at it with the lens of maybe what are the things that we need to change to adapt to different funding models and to adapt to some of the maybe different contractual relationships that Daniela and Jennifer were talking about. But do any of you want to feed into this as well?
I think there's always will be obligation to fit in. And so if you build a strong partnership at the beginning, you can find ways together. Because if we wait until all the fund review and all the treaty review all the treaty, when are we going to co-produce? We are co-producing at the moment. I think for me, there is a core thing is that in other industry, we are talking about equity, it means, I think, considering the specificities of the co-producer we have in front of us, whether it comes from a high or a low capacity, exactly as in other sector. If you take, I don't know, the cosmetic sector, if you take a big company negotiating with a very small airport to be distributed, I mean, if he tries to screw them, he's just not going to distribute the thing he has and all his stuff in the airport. So he loses the deal. So I think it's exactly the same, where we have obligations, we have constraints, but working in a safe environment and building really the capacity of working together. And I always hear trust, but yeah, but trust has to be implemented and it has to be concrete. And so I think whatever are the obligations or the constraints, it doesn't change anything as what is in the report. I mean, you can follow this and find ways together and find ways to address this, maybe to the fund and say, this is not possible, we cannot reach this, or how can we reach together the obligation that we have to fulfill? So I'm not sure it's, I mean, of course, I mean, funds, and as you said, it's another panel, funds and institutions, they have to review their requirements, they have to review their frameworks, but it's not going to be done quickly.
I think I can just answer your question on the Arab world front, because we have a very fragile film industry, and also funds are shrinking, also in the Arab funds. And it has never really been a problem if a European or an American wants to come and shoot in the Arab world, and there are possibilities for equity, private equity or distribution that would come quite quickly and quite easily, much more easily than for Arab filmmakers. So the Arab funds that were created tried to protect, you know, the Arab filmmakers by forcing an Arab filmmaker like nationality, but they don't even enforce an Arab producer. So you can be a European producer and submit to Doha Film Institute or Red Sea Fund or Arab Fund for Arts and Culture and still get the funding, which is something that we Arab producers struggle with, because like these are our sources, and another producer can come and say, I can apply to this, you don't need to, and consider them on their part. So I don't think we really have this problem. I don't think today we really need to think about how to stabilize the evolution of Arab cinema that has been great and going since 2010 because of the presence of the Arab funds, and having welcoming foreigners has never been a problem. The problem was how to be able to sustain an emerging cinema that is quite fragile and make sure it's of an international quality, because a European or an American will come with, you know, a great DP, a great editor, a very good team, and they will ensure a quality that some of the Arab filmmakers are still struggling to implement. And this is our job as producers, while doing co-productions, to make sure we elevate the value of the films so they become films and not just like, this is good for an Arab film, you know, and like you lower your standards while watching it. So I don't feel we have this issue right now.
Do we have maybe one final question in the room? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, hello. I'm just curious, I'm a writer-director, I'm not a producer, but I'm just curious about what Jennifer was saying about credits, because I think that's a massive problem in every industry, and I think that you are absolutely 100% right, but how do we enforce it? Because I think sometimes it's because people want to hide things like chain of IP and, you know, where certain ideas came from, and so it's a really important thing. But how do we do it? I mean, there have to be sort of penalties when people, you know, how should I say, take a writer's idea and then give it to somebody else who's got a bigger portfolio? Do you know what I'm saying? That really is something that has to be enforced.
I think, I don't know what you think, but you probably have answers. I think discussing it not as just something in the contract at the end, but discussing it up front and make sure that, yes, credit is something also flexible. It's something that you have to meet your constraints, because sometimes you have obligation and you have to justify the credits in front of your institution. And sometimes it's a false excuse, like, oh, I have to show that the person has been paid, so I cannot, put you in the in the credit. I don't know, as a supporting person or as an associate producer. But there are ways also to navigate this. In terms of intellectual property and author rights, this is another story, and this is. I mean, crediting properly is acknowledging people who have been working on it, and if people don't acknowledge you, I mean, there's a huge issue here, because it shouldn't be a problem. It should be absolutely normal to credit if you have a contract and not hiding, because otherwise it's. You're dealing with people who are not, they're not in the field of being fair or anything. They're not doing business. They're crooks then. So I don't know what you.
No, it just made me think a little bit, like the reason why we're even having this conversation is because, like, producers and storytellers, filmmakers from our regions, from low capacity countries and minorities, we do have a voice now. So that's why this can even happen, that we can even have this conversation. So these kinds of cases, when they happen, we can talk about them, we can flag them, and hopefully people will understand that they can't just go out any longer and do crazy shit without any repercussions. So I'm hopeful towards that, and that we can change this dynamic and also find producers to work with that understand this. And I think one thing we also talked about in the group was that there should be some kind of equitable co-production certificate that producers from high-capacity production countries could have. And so we know that they understand the value of this, that they're not afraid to lose power, to lose the ability to make films just because they also distribute their power to people who actually need it more. And that's what happens when you find really good producers to work with that are also allies, is that they will elevate you. And they will give you the credit because they know that you can benefit from it in the long run much more than they can.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, hopefully that can happen. And I don't mean just for the first writer. Sometimes it's somebody who's done God knows how much script editing that gets shelved somewhere.
It's tricky because you don't have the same author regime depending on the country. So of course, there should be something that reflect the reality of the writers who are at the origin of a project. And that's why I think in the contract it's very important to have in the co-production contract, maybe in the writer contract, had the recitals, the genesis of the project, who has the ideas, who has been working on it, and the more details you have and the more proof you have, the best it is for then the development.
Yeah, so thank you for those questions. I think we're at time. I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you again to our panel for being with us here bright and early this morning, as well to our partners, some of which I see in the room, Winnies Meets West, EAVE, Telefilm Canada, Creative Europe, the Canada Media Fund, and of course to the Marché for having us this morning. I think I'd leave you also on the note to remember you can use these QR codes to download the report in French or English. Please remember, it's not a checklist. It's not all the things that you do on every project. Consider it as an invitation to have as a conversation with co-producers when you're starting out, and to go through it maybe with a nice bottle of rosé or a pot of tea and figure out what works and what makes sense for your film. Thank you.